let's dive right into this explainer where we're going to unpack a truly chilling true story. It's meticulously researched by journalist David Grann in his book Killers of the Flower Moon. And really, this is a deeply detailed account of a tragic, yet somehow incredibly overlooked chapter in American history known as the Osage Reign of Terror. We're going to look at how extreme wealth, cultural clashes, unchecked greed, and just horrific ambition created a perfect storm of tragedy. It's a story that blends cold, hard facts with some deeply sensitive questions about human nature, and we are going to explore it all right now. Now, to truly understand this tragedy, we first need to zoom in on a completely fascinating economic paradox in 1920s America. We're talking about a time just over a century ago, and to set the stage, you kind of have to ask yourself a staggering question. What actually happens when the richest people on Earth become the targets of the most sinister conspiracy in American history? I mean, it honestly sounds like a Hollywood script, doesn't it? But this was a harsh, undeniable reality. See that number 1? That represents the wealth status of the Osage Nation. Back in the early 1920s, thanks to massive oil deposits discovered directly beneath their reservation right outside of Pawhuska, Oklahoma, the Osage were literally ranked number 1 as the wealthiest people per capita in the entire country. They were sitting right on top of one of the largest oil deposits in the United States. It was just an incredible stroke of geographic luck, and it fundamentally shifted the economic power dynamics of that whole era. So, how did this actually work? Well, this enormous wealth was distributed through something called head rights. Under tribal law, a head right was a guaranteed share of the tribe's mineral trust. It ensured vast, flowing wealth for each individual Osage member. But as you can probably guess, those staggering amounts of money quickly became a double-edged sword, because as these wildly exaggerated stories about the Osage's overflowing wealth began to spread like wildfire, it quickly attracted the aggressive, deeply rooted greed of the surrounding white population. And unfortunately, the system was completely rigged against them from the outside. The government came in and instituted a deeply paternalistic policy called guardianship. Basically, this system officially declared the Osage people incompetent to manage their own fortunes. Just think about that. Because of this, their massive financial accounts were forcefully taken out of their hands and placed right under the control of their white neighbors. The stark contrast between their immense, totally legitimate wealth and this oppressive, forced guardianship system, it created a localized breeding ground for trickery, cruelty, and outright evil. Act 1. Wealth and Terror. The target on Molly Burkhart's family. To see exactly how this terror unfolded on a human level, Grann's research anchors this massive historical event on the deeply personal tragedy of Molly Burkhart. She was an Osage woman married to a white man named Ernest Burkhart. Now, as this terrifying timeline shows, Molly basically watched helplessly as a closing net of death took her family members one by one in rapid succession. First, her sister Anna is found shot in the back of the head. Then Charles Whitehorn is shot to death in that very same valley. Next, her sister Minnie dies of a mysterious wasting illness. And just months later, Molly's mother Lizzie dies of the exact same illness. And finally, her sister Rita and her husband Bill are killed in a massive explosion that reduces their home to absolute rubble. At this point, Molly was left absolutely certain of 2 things. Her family was being slaughtered for their head rights, and she was next. Act 2. The federal investigation steps in. With local law enforcement proving to be completely corrupt, often actively looking the other way or participating in the cover-ups themselves, the string of murders finally caught the attention of the federal government. And this brings us to a clash of 2 very different lawmen. On one side, you have J. Edgar Hoover, a young, highly careful guy who had just taken over the Bureau of Investigation, which, by the way, wasn't even called the FBI yet. Hoover saw this as the perfect high-profile opportunity to legitimize federal power. But to do the actual groundwork, he dispatched Tom White, an intimidating former Texas Ranger, to lead a team secretly into Oklahoma to figure out what was going on. Now, the sheer level of corruption Tom White encountered was unbelievable. The boomtowns were so deeply compromised and dangerous that White's agents literally couldn't just walk in and flash a badge. They actually had to hire a colorful cast of local criminals. We're talking bootleggers, moonshiners, and cattle rustlers to act as undercover spies just to safely navigate the underworld and gather intelligence. Act 3. Unmasking the mastermind. Through dangerous undercover work, piecing together whispers, and following the bloody trail of money, the agents eventually zeroed in on a highly respected, powerful figure sitting right at the very center of the town's web. And it wasn't some shadowy outsider, it was William K. Hale. He was a prominent cattleman who had somehow elevated himself to assistant sheriff. Hale seemed to control absolutely everyone and everything in the town. And beneath that cool, controlled exterior, investigators realized he was the ruthless architect of these murders, devising a horrifyingly calculating plan to steal the Osage wealth. The steps of his plan brilliantly and terribly illustrate the cold, mechanical nature of Hale's plot. Step 1, systematically murder Molly's family members one by one. Step 2, utilize two completely corrupt local doctors, the Shawn brothers, to falsify death certificates and just hide the evidence. And step 3, once the head rights cascaded all the way down to Molly, he plotted to kill Molly herself to consolidate and inherit the money. The entire thing relied on the systemic betrayal of trust by the very leaders of the community. But honestly, here's where the story truly turns the stomach. Because Hale couldn't pull this off alone, right? He needed an inside man. And that inside man was his own nephew, Ernest Burkhart, Molly's husband. The most devastating twist of this localized mystery was that the man sleeping in Molly's own bed, the father of her children, was actively assisting his uncle in the systematic slaughter of her family the entire time. So when Tom White and his team finally confronted Hale with the proof, Hale just remained completely cool. He promised to fight it with everything he had. And the subsequent trial? Incredibly tense. Ernest Burkhart was placed on the stand, and under this immense pressure, he actually flipped back and forth between testifying for his uncle and speaking against him. But ultimately, the overwhelming guilt and pain got to him. His damning testimony finally broke through Hale's iron grip on the corrupted judge and jury. In what was a shocking turn of events for a town so thoroughly bought and paid for, Hale was found guilty and sentenced to life in the extremely harsh Leavenworth prison. And on the surface, it felt like a neat textbook resolution. Hale goes to prison. J. Edgar Hoover gets the high-profile win he needs to solidify the creation of the FBI. And Tom White even goes on to become the warden at Leavenworth, literally guarding the very man he caught. Act 4. The Hidden, Darker Truth. This is exactly where David Grann's modern-day research shatters that neat textbook resolution. Between 2012 and 2015, Grann dug deep into the U.S. National Archives, and the contrast he found is just staggering. The official FBI narrative claimed the Reign of Terror was a tight 5-year period with 20 to 30 victims all cleanly solved. But Grann discovered the horrifying truth. The killings actually spanned almost 20 years. The victim count wasn't 20 or 30, it was hundreds. The FBI really only solved a tiny fraction of the murders, leaving this sprawling, decades-long conspiracy largely hidden and completely unpunished. And Grann points out a very sad reality here. Because the Bureau basically failed to seek complete justice, and instead just opted to take a PR victory for a handful of convictions, this massive tragedy isn't taught in our schools. The wider suffering of the Osage people has been largely forgotten by the general public. But, as Grann notes, history is often a merciless judge. The truth, no matter how deeply they tried to bury it, eventually finds the light. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this incredibly haunting quote Grann heard from an Osage resident, echoing the Bible, "The blood cries out from the ground." It really asks us to deeply consider, when history glosses over a massive tragedy, does a neat official narrative ever truly bury the truth? Thank you so much for walking through this dark but essential piece of history with me. Take this knowledge with you and always keep questioning the narratives we're handed.